Okay, my name is Robert Jammer-Inga, capital D, city of Eindhoven. I think we agree that for design-led innovation, for improving quality of life, aging, active aging, health, etc., we are facing a period that needs radical innovation, not incremental innovation. And, well, I would like to have the opinion of the panelists. Nobody even touched the word technology. A lot of the radical innovations in the past are driven by the smart use of technology, and design as already a track record in putting technology in the right place on the right spot. So, what does the panel think of the rather interesting combination of design and technology as a driving force for the truly innovation we need in Europe, when it's concerning about the issues we just addressed, but also, well, facing the fact that in 40 years 75% of the world population will live in cities, and then there will be an immense pressure on food, fresh water and energy, and that can also be the ingredients of, well, World War III or whatever in the most black scenarios. So back to my first question, what do you think of the combination design and technology as a driving force for innovation?
I think it's very important. We didn't speak about it yet, but I think when you look, for my example, for maintenance of your city, we have a decreasing of budgets. And we think that by actively participation of citizens, we can do things in public space with less money, but that will not be the answer. I think we have to find the answer in design and techniques, like new ways of cleaning cities and etc. So I think it's very important to look at both that subjects.
I might have a bit of a go at this. So there's maybe a slightly heretical response, which is, I did talk about technology, but I talked about software, not hardware. A lot of, I heard an anthropologist from Intel, Simon Roberts, speak on the aging issue a few years ago, and he said, look, technology is ubiquitous. It's here, it's everywhere we need it to. What we don't need is more technology. What we need to do is actually work out how we want to use it, and actually thinking about how humans interact is the important thing, and then asking the question, how can technology assist with that? So I do think also that technology can play a role, but I think it's about what order you or what priority you place on technology in the sort of the problem-solving process. In Australia, we're about to invest $40 billion in a national broadband network, which is the single largest infrastructure investment in Australia's history. Everyone thinks it's going to have a massive benefit for telehealth, for remote education, and a bunch of other things, but no one's actually invested the time and effort to try and describe what those models might look like. So I get a bit nervous sometimes with technology being kind of a solution to a problem. Is that the right way around? It's an answer to a question that no one's asked.
Yeah, but my question is about a combination, because in your metaphor, software without hardware is useless, and the other way around.
Yeah, and that's right. And so I guess it's a question of both. But you know, just sort of investing in technology without thinking about the human systems around it. Yeah, I think we're agreeing that you need both. We just happen to focus in the first incidence on the human system side of things.
I think the not going into very deep in this discussion, but we all know that this model of technology-driven innovation, which was quite dominant, especially in this very country, for a long time, is not the way how to go anymore. But it doesn't mean technology is not there. But I think one of the few things what we kind of open questions. One is that if we would start from the zero now and create our welfare services, I'm quite convinced that we would use more technology and more kind of gadgets and things on creating them. They would be better that way. The problem is that how there's such a long history and such a big infrastructure on how we create public services today, then jump. It seems to be not to be possible to jump to use modern technology and modern things in order to provide services, because we don't know how. There's so much capital, both kind of in buildings and stuff and machines and in people, that it seems to be politically impossible and economically difficult to start using technology which is already there to provide services. I think it's over-exaggerated quite often that old people don't use technology. That's not true anymore. It's all the statistics say. In Helsinki, we made a study that in the age group over, I think in the other end of the table you might know better, but I mean over 65-year-olds, a huge majority of them had an access to broadband, and a huge majority of them were using it weekly, for example. So that's true that it's not kind of it's a question of access might not be so true, but the other thing is that we cannot just jump from one step to other. And the last point about technology is that I think this comes, the role of design is one of the interesting things, because in my mind design is part of the innovation process in research and it's R&D. And then where you place it is that it should be there in the beginning of the process, not in the middle or the end. And as well as the technology is also kind of a thing that I would even say that technology can come later in the process, because a lot of the existing technologies are not used fully today. But this doesn't mean that in any given day a new technology which is invented and put in the market allows us to do things differently. And then the big question is, are we able to do that and how we do that?
I'll add a bit on it, because I spent many years in the IT business in trying to sell transformative solutions from technology. And now I work much more in person-to-person interaction type businesses. I think particularly in those social areas, in my view, they're rarely, well, so far, technology has rarely produced transformative solutions. It tends to produce more of those efficiency improvement solutions that Brenton was talking about at the start. The one I think, though, does make a difference is broadband, because to a large extent, 10, 15 years ago, I found we were trying to sell solutions which have changed. Broadband has probably had as much change as any. I mean, just at a personal level, I went back to my hotel room last night and Skyped to my daughter in the UK with just a device that cost a few £100, because there's fast broadband and wireless connection in the hotel. A few years ago, that was completely impossible. So there's a new level of interaction possible. What tends to happen, I think, the technology catches up with what you're trying to achieve with design, not the other way around. If you start with a mindset that this piece of technology, whether it's hard or soft, is going to change the world, it rarely does. It's suddenly 5 years later, people turn around and say, why aren't we using that as a way of doing things better? But that's a personal view, because I used to do it for a living. So.
Yeah, I think to me the question is how much of a social problem can be dissolved in technology. I think I see two issues at stake there. One is it's very trivial, that generations that come up, just adapt and include technology and it will become natural. But at the same time, there are a certain number of people who will be excluded for different reasons. And we really need to take care of that. And it's not only that they will be excluded because they don't know how to read and write, which is one of the biggest problems that the current technology or the current screens require from you, that you are able to read. Sometimes in a foreign language. It doesn't make your life necessarily very easy when you have to get cash from a machine. So there's this level of literacy which will adapt probably. But there's also how much of external knowledge am I forced to integrate to use technology? What I mean by that is that under the label of service design and making you able to order your train ticket from home, I don't want to become, you know, a train ticket expert in France and Germany and Finland and the Netherlands, you know. I would just want to have a train ticket given to me, you know, by a person who understands what is my objective, take the next train to go from this place to that place. And when people push me to a machine, I find this extremely frustrating. They have two ways of pushing me at the machine. Either there's no one, and just a machine, or when I want to go to a person, they ask me to pay more, which is a shame, you know. It's like having a fine because you go and talk to a person. Think of all, I mean, if you land in Japan, how would you manage? That's one thing. And the second thing is that this technology ties you to a system. Now, just close your eyes 2 seconds and think if there's a major electricity disruption in Helsinki for the next 3 hours. You have no telephone, we can't talk with the mics, there's no electricity. So everything gets, you know, broken because of a fairly normal standard event, you know. And I think that's the other problem. And thank God, you know, the social issues we're dealing with are far more complex than that. So they can be only marginally resolved by technology.
Well, the answer of the panel is, maybe I didn't put my question crystal clear. My question was your opinion about the combination of those two, not to choose between design or technology. And we can come up with some sort of best practices of where design really can help. By people who in Eindhoven, we got some pilot projects, people who otherwise have to move to an elderly home, can stay longer at home, feel secure. There's a sort of an electronic nurse watching for them, and we got some more problems, examples of that. So I think technology and design can reinforce themselves.
A very short comment on what you're saying, because in France we have this movement, you know, to put as much technology as possible, you know, of course, to the home of the elderly people. And what has been noticed, I guess it's more or less the same everywhere, is that it's not the people who, it's not the elderly people who actually want that, it's their kids who force it upon the parents. The parents are humiliated to be forced to wear a device, you know, that will call, you know, an ambulance if they fall down. And I think it's really important to distinguish the driver behind the justification of technology and who are the real prescribers of technology, especially regarding the aging population. It's not the aging population generally. It is those who have to take care of them.
So I don't entirely agree with that. In UK, there's some very good telecare schemes. I was actually going to come back and say the one big exception I can think of to technology just being a fairly minor enabler is the potential to use telecare type systems to keep people at home, which could be self-funding compared to the cost of moving them faster. I suspect they are imposed sometimes, but the one I know best is Essex in England, just north of London. They've done some very good things with telecare and rapid response systems. But there is a lot of problem with them, and half the time the problem is just that the battery's gone flat, and because the person who owns it has got a form of dementia, they've forgotten to replace the battery. But they're quite a good solution. And maybe there are other examples we could think of.
Just a brief note, just a bit provocative. I don't think the problem if people feel humiliating to wear something when they fall down they call help. It's not the technology problem. I think it's more like a design problem. It's not the technology that's wrong there. It's how it adapted, how it's used for that special case. Because all the studies and experience show that we always last 20 years have underestimated the speed people adapt in all ages when they adapt new technologies. We should stop underestimating the people's capacity and willingness to adapt new technologies, because they are doing it, especially in the developed world, in a speed that it's faster than always all the forecasts. That's the general, like a thumb rule. So why we should think about that people, elderly people who are, after 10 years, they are people who are already used all their lives, or all their grown-up lives, lots of technology. They will adapt it fast if it's, I use this word purpose, designed right. It's not about technology, it's about design.
Yeah, one comment. I think the discussion about design and technology and all these things, I think we put it on the wrong level in this conference. I think to have sustainable solutions for social problems and all kinds of problems for the future, that we need multidisciplinary teams everywhere, in government, in companies, in public service sector. And multidisciplinary, it's always with designers, design thinking, to see it visual, that we can complement the thinking of engineers and sociologists and everything, that we see what we are talking about. On the other hand, these multidisciplinary teams, they can structure, and so it's about talking about teaching the teachers that is a normal way of living and normal way of thinking on all this, in all these sectors. So now we have role models and we have projects, but on the long term, this has to be the normal way of living on all these levels. So a multidisciplinary team and design thinking has to be included, and then you don't have the way of, yes, is it technology or is it not technology? I think it's not a moment to talk about this. It's about the design thinking and the level, on all the levels of procurement, of executing, of businesses, of public sector, and all the way.
Could I ask, particularly the Neil, Brenton and Sean, shortly comment on Arja's presentation and the case. What came up into your mind when you were listening, Arja?
There are a couple of things that occurred to me when listening to it, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it tomorrow. And it's actually something that also comes up in the terms of the outcomes-based funding model. And I guess it's a question, there are two questions for me. One is, how do you create a market where a market hasn't existed previously? So it's one thing to give people a personal budget, but if they've never been a purchaser of services before, can they be good customers in terms of the demand side of things? And on the supply side of things, if no one's ever had to try and pitch for your custom before, do you actually have the right kind of supply? So I think both on the outcomes funding side of things and the personal budgeting side of things, I think there's a bit of a sequencing issue that we have to resolve, which is you can't go from state provision to personal budgeting in one jump, because actually, as you sort of said, some people are used to having the city kind of telling them what they want, and now they're just given a bundle of cash and say, well, you work it out. I'm reminded of the Henry Ford quote when he said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said I wanted a faster horse. Now, if you gave his customers a personal budget, but without him going out and actually creating an offer that was compelling, that actually enabled them to sort of see beyond horses and actually start to see that there might be different ways of resolving their the particular needs that they have, then so moving the money around in different ways in and of itself won't solve the problem. I guess the other bit for me, and it's something that's come up a number of times in conversations about the use of design in public policy, and this is about creating services that are, well, let me take a step back. one thing that design does really well is it makes things, products, services, intuitive, elegant, a pleasure to deal with. You know, when you get out your iPhone, it feels good, it works, it does exactly what I want it to do. If I walk into a well-designed service experience, everything is kind of, it's anticipated my needs and it knows where I'm coming from and it responds well to what I want to do. That can be said of very few public services. That degree of anticipation, that degree of elegance, that degree of intuition, and the attractiveness, the fact that people want to engage with public services. And I suspect there's a bit of a schizophrenia that lies at the heart of this, which is public servants don't want to do the job too well because they don't want people to keep coming back. And I think as we move towards sort of more demand-driven models, we actually have to move towards situations where services actually do have to become appealing. We have to try and develop services that people want to engage with. And I guess this brings up the final point, which is actually a reflection on Neil's earlier presentation, which is if we're going to put funding around outcomes, let's make sure we put them around outcomes that matter to people. Come back to my point before about coming home from, you know, work and saying, well, I didn't lose the kids today, so that was a success. Let's talk about a personal thriving budget. And then give people the opportunity to purchase services that actually help them not just deal with the deficits that they have and the needs that they have, but actually enable them to try and drive towards the aspirations they have for their lives. And so I think both in terms of the outcome-based funding model and the Lautasari model, I think trying to give people a sense of capability in being informed customers on one hand, and actually on the supply side, creating the kinds of services that don't just meet their transactional needs, not just the showering and the shopping, but actually help them live the kinds of lives that they would ideally like to. And I think that's a big stretch. I think that's new territory for public services to go into that space, but I think it's potentially a really, really powerful one. And I think it goes to the heart of why we have public services, which is not just to plug gaps, but to enable all of our citizens to live the lives that they would ideally like to live.
I agree with all of that. There's several points that I'd like to pick up. First is to say you're quite right about outcomes funding, and there are two. One reason why I think in the longer term the personal budget model, the individual choosing the outcomes they want, is a better one than what we call the commission model in the UK, which is where somebody else is deciding what the outcomes are. There are two risks in that. The first is that you're right. It sets a limited view of the outcomes that are required. There will be almost certainly some convergence between the outcomes that the organisation thinks it wants and the individuals want. That they're likely to be more at the gap plugging level than at the how do we live fantastically better lives level. And the second risk, which has definitely come up on the work we've done, is if you're trying to make it self-funding, you automatically graduate towards the outcomes that save you the most money, as opposed to the outcomes that might be most desirable. So you've got the finance driving it more than it needs to. So that's an important consideration. The second reflection is entirely on all fours, which is about making personal budgets work needs three things. One is the informed customer. It took off first in the UK. It was first applied successfully to disabled adults, severely physically disabled adults, young adults, because they wanted to take control of their lives and they needed a lot of support, which meant you were putting budgets together from a range of sources that got to quite a hefty amount of money that made it quite effective. It's harder to make it work with the elderly for the obvious reasons that they're either used to just taking what they're given and often quite happy with that, or they find it much harder to make the decisions. And there is a risk in the process that all you do is transfer it from them getting a service provided by the state or whatever it is, it's local government in the UK generally, to them having to employ their own carer, which means they've got to do all those things. And there are my company's involved in contracts which are basically just the local authority paying a third party to act as advocate on behalf of the individual to help them through that, or just provide them with some of the support they need. And to me, if that becomes a long-term model, it defeats the object of making it work. And on the other thing is doing it in the right areas. The one that I think has been a bit ridiculous in the UK is doing it with the community equipment. So, for example, the type of equipment that people with minor disabilities need, things to help them turn taps, raised toilet seats, those sorts of things. In the UK, we spent years moving to a system where those were procured at scale to save a lot of money and make it very, very effective. And the government has decided that that should be a personal budget, when in fact it's, for me, the wrong thing. That whether you should, because there is no market for external supply, sensible supply of some of those items. So nearly always what happens is you give someone a voucher to go and buy a raised toilet seat, and they buy it from the person who would have supplied it to them in the first place. So it's picking and choosing the right ways to use these things and focus on the things that really matter to people.
Well, something what always interests me when we are not making new public services, and I find this idea of a personal budget, of course, very interesting, and it's studied and explored and maybe taken into action. But the one problem is exactly what was pointed here: how you create a market somewhere where there is no market. And just taking my thoughts on that is that one of the key issue of market is pricing. How you price things, how you give a price tag for people that they can then choose. And it's like, I find it in that case, it's a very complicated issue, because I just want to put, if you're an investor and you want to put money into something, there's something that gives you immediate, there are like one investment is something that you don't lose and you don't win, it's safe. Second investment, you take some risk, but payback time is short, so you get your money back very fast. Or you put lots of money in something that you know that I will benefit on that only after 5 years or 10 years. How you price in markets, and if you buy shares, they do pricing on that by marketplace. But how you price things, how you kind of encourage people to make good choices that are not only kind of covering, pricing based on production costs of different services doesn't follow the idea of why we have healthcare. So that's I think the key issue, and then if you do the pricing right, then the people's behavior will follow. And how you do that, I don't know.
Just to make it more complicated, I think the further challenge is we're not dealing solely with things that can be marketized. The personal budget you mentioned in Lautasari is also about informal care. So what price do you put on having a neighbour come around and talk to you about knitting or horror movies? And how can you provide budgets to enable those things to occur without trying to create, to crowd out what is good neighbourly behaviour? And that's something that we're going to have to try and work out when we look at our sharing zone idea, because we're not just trying to take stuff that was provided by the state and open it up to other providers to provide. We're also trying to enable a whole bunch of activities, some of which we've never put prices on before. So it goes to the sort of the household economy.
Pekka, shortly, and then Sean.
Well, just saying that in a true world, I would also get 100 euros more if I take part of the elderly gymnastics and take 60 euros for my budget when I'm taking part of the cultural activities in the city, because this is the fact by studies, but how you add that into this budget. So you can then balance, you can earn money and you can lose it, and you can spend and earn. That's the market.
Yeah, well, just to continue on that thread and to make it not more complicated, just to make a quantum leap. I'll sound very French, you'll forgive me. There's one thing that puzzled me is the use of the word budget. I don't mind using it in kind of private discussion between professionals. I would hate to have this, transfer to the end users, if you want to call them, or to the people. Because of course, when you use the word budget goes directly to, or connotates money immediately. And care, to me, is, I don't know if you use this word in English, incommensurable. It has strictly no value. You don't measure it. Whereas, of course, the cost of sending someone to give you a shower or to walk you to the supermarket and help you with your shopping has a cost because it's one amount of the salary. But that's our internal institutional business. And I think we don't, or we shouldn't push the internal issue into the external problem. What I mean by that is that we have to deliver something that is intrinsically non-measurable. And I think it's very important to keep this as a kind of red line. Any society, that's the good side of anthropology, it shows that in any society you have economies of things that are being exchanged, but in all societies there are a certain number of things that are taken out of this circuit. It doesn't mean that they are not exchanged. It doesn't mean that they are not transferred from one person to another person, but they're not transferred from one person to another person through their kind of monetary value. And the problem there is very simple. Do we consider that care? It has a cost, that's one thing, but it doesn't mean it has a monetary value. And therefore, I don't like the use of the word budget. I like what you've used, the notion of incentive. I get an incentive for something that I deal with, and this incentive we negotiate. And last point, I think that taking care of people is an investment. It's not a cost. It's an investment because you need a society you need to transfer things from persons to persons. You need time to transfer life experience. If you don't do that, there's no society. If you don't do that, there's violence immediately. So it is an investment to take care of the people.
But I also think that I have been very happy about the Lauttasaari project, and I really support them to go, I would say, all the way. Because it's a different issue to talk about how things will work in theory and work in panel discussions, and then really prototyping, which is a method, doing it. They will find out whether we are all talking here something which is really true and important, or does it really function. And that's the way how things are developed in the real world. You prototype, you try it, and then you figure it out whether it was functioning or not. And then you prototype again and do it a better way. So I would say, I would encourage to do exactly things like this, which are little sensitive. And because that's the way, maybe the only way to find out how they should be developed and done. So that's why I think it's very important to do projects like this, because if you only do things where you know that everybody accepts in the beginning, are fully agree on the value set and everything behind it, you very seldom find anything innovative. There's always something disruptive in a great innovation. And then you find out whether it's good or bad.
Okay, thank you for bearing this long today. But I have a final question to all of our panelists. In your opinion, in your personal opinion, what is the most important issue? Only one issue. We have to focus here. What, based on the discussion, most important issue one should take into account when designing radical innovations, and since we are in the city hall, within public sector context. So the one issue one should take into account when designing radical innovations within public sector context. And please, Arja, let's start here.
Thank you. I think that the most important thing is that we create the new solutions with the people who use the services, who or the politicians or civil servants. We have to ask them also the suitable technology. The problem is that developing technology, mainly engineers formally has used them, has developed them without the user. So the most important thing in every development act is to ask what you need, how this works in the reality, and I have to say that this elderly generation that we are serving nowadays is very different of those baby boomers who wants to have different kind of offers and different kind of purchasing things, also maybe personal budgets in the future.
I'm going to be controversial because I seem to have been cast as the money man today, which I'm not really, but I do think the most important thing is that radical design enables us to reuse the resources we've got better, and ideally enables us to spend much more with much less. I know that sounds terribly right-wing and illiberal and all those sorts of things, but the facts about the growing demands for every nation in Europe and every nation in the developed world are undeniable. We have got to find ways of coping, or we will have revolution on the streets by about 2060.
I think the most important thing is that we think human-centered and work in multidisciplinary teams. So we can find the best solution, and we as a government do not think that we have the solution.
Okay, so in the context of aging, we've added 30 years of life expectancy in the last 50 years. And the pace of improvement is, if anything, increasing. You know, there's talk, gerontologists at a conference I was at last week sort of said, look, people are going, the young generation today are likely to live to 120, 130 at the rate we're improving. But even if we park that for a second and just talk about the last 50 years, we've added 30 years of life expectancy in the last 50, and yet we still operate largely under a welfare state institutional setting that was designed in the 1940s. So, the most important issue about doing radical innovation in a public sector context, I think, is to create sufficient space within the public sector institutions for new models to be explored, tested, incubated, and scaled. And that means having people who are prepared to defend the line and say, look, use an Australian expression, bugger off, we're trying something different here. Watch this space, and we'll see whether it works. It's rigorous, it's not anarchic, but it's very, very different to the way we operate today. And that needs resources, that needs time, that needs the right kinds of teams. It may mean turning a blind eye on a Sunday to allow people to try something different. It may mean other kinds of escape valves that we have in legislation to allow people to try things out on a test basis. And if you haven't looked at the Power to Innovate law in the UK education legislation, I'd encourage you to Google it. It's a really interesting way of how you can create space within legislation to try something out. The deal is, if you want to try and innovate, but the law stops you, you can write to the minister and say, look, we want to try something, can we just waive this thing for 2 years? And we're trying to get that up in a few pieces of legislation in Australia. So we have to create this space, because the pace of change, the pace of demographic, technological change is thundering along. And we need to try and find ways of increasing the innovation pace within the public sector.
I think that with my experience at the moment, which is quite modest, if I had to set up a team, I would concentrate only on the team. I would make sure that all the people who are in this team clearly understand that the statements like things should be different, but I don't want to change, is not a wicked problem, it's just a stupid statement. And move these people swiftly out of the project.
Very difficult to say anything after that. Because it's very correct. I would say only two things. We just have to, quite simply, if you're talking about innovation, is to just to change your view, see the things differently and from different angle. And then 2 points on that. One, we haven't actually really realized how just understanding the user-driven innovation model, which is a kind of boring word, but you all understand what I mean. It's a very radical change on how public administration works today. It's almost a revolution, even though it sounds simple, because it's not embedded in the decision making and how public services are delivered. We have here lightly talked about it, but it's a really, really radical move when we start to think about what it requires. And the second thing, based on statistics, at least in Finland, elderly people have they have the two things that we all look after in our lives, the most needed resources. They have time and they have money. And we all others miss one or the other. And the issue is that what kind of incentives and methods we create to help elderly people to use them in a way that is good for them and good for society. As simple as that.